You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Homefield Apparel. And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another celebratory post-selection show extravaganza episode of the Assembly Call, as today your Indiana Hoosiers earn or are given a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. Certainly we think that they earned the 4 seed. But, you know, the selection committee has all of their own criteria, and I think one of the themes that kind of came out of the bracketology process over the last few days, as, you know, Indiana was it seemed very set as a 4, and then they lose, and, you know, Virginia wins and Duke wins, and it starts to look like, well, could Indiana fall down to a 5? And it's like, look, you know, if you're a 4 or a 5, you're somewhere between the 13th and 20th best team in the country. And it just depends on what criteria the selection committee decides that they're going to prioritize in that given year. But it doesn't change your body of work. And really, I think a 4 or a 5 seed would have been worthy based on what Indiana did this season. But we are certainly happy and I think agree that Indiana's body of work was good enough to get a 4, and they do get a 4 seed in the Midwest region. The Hoosiers will be taking on the MAC champion, the 13 seed Kent State. We will talk about that matchup here coming up. And then the 5-12 seed is Miami versus Drake. And of course, the number 1 seed in Indiana's region, as we knew that it would be, is Houston and Kelvin Sampson. So Ryan, as we look at what the committee set up here, we face Kent State in the NCAA tournament. This will be, I think, our 3rd time facing them, coached by Rob Senderhoff, who was
one of Sampson's assistants, who was the most guilty of everything that happened.
Yes, and then, of course, Sampson there as the number 1 seed.
I will say, but, you know, I want to emphasize, Jared, the committee does not try and create storylines or narratives, though. That they don't do that. They refuse to do that. They just blankly look at them. They don't. Right, guys. Sure. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Just like Texas A&M being the 7 and Texas being a 2, not intentional at all, right?
Not at all. Nope, not at all. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Kent State's a really good team. As far as I can tell, I haven't watched them. I actually did watch them this year twice. I texted you guys I hadn't, and then somebody reminded me that I watched them with him. They're not a great shooting team. They're okay. Which if you're just looking at the things that Indiana struggles with, they're 217th in 3-point percentage. They're a defensive team. I mean, they play defense. They give up a lot of free throws, which was one thing I noticed. But solid defense, and they're a veteran team. So how do they guard Trayce Jackson-Davis? Can Indiana hit shots? Pretty much the questions we have for every game this season involving Indiana. So I don't think it's too much to get worked up about. But yeah, it is going to be interesting to see how Indiana responds to playing a veteran team. They're a veteran team. How do they respond? How do the bench players, how do they guard a veteran team? How does a veteran team guard a freshman point guard? And can Trayce Jackson-Davis do what Trayce Jackson-Davis does? And Indiana will be favored to win this game pretty significantly, I would imagine. But they are playing a good team, and they didn't get a team that backed in. They got a team that won its way in. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting. It should be really interesting. And if, you know, Rob Senderhoff has built his teams like Kelvin Sampson has built his teams, which is very tough, very hard-nosed, there are going to be bruises in this game and, you know, contusions and things you got to worry about for a few days afterwards. But, you know, this is the kind of game that Indiana can win. This isn't Penn State or Iowa type offense that they're going to be facing.
Yeah, and, you know, look, as a lot of people, you know, in the chat mob, I saw someone said this. Ross said, nobody in the team gives an S about Senderhoff or Sampson. Absolutely. That's just a made-for-TV fan-type storyline. So it's not anything that I think Mike Woodson's going to care about. It's not anything that the players are going to care about at all. I think, Ryan, when you look at Kent State, you know, look, I think you look at a 4-13 matchup, right? And you think, okay, you know, this is, you know, Kent State is ranked 71st. And I think if you just, you know, kind of look at that and you don't dig deeper, you think, okay, you know, 4-13, let's go, Indiana. This is a game that we should win by 10 or 15 points. And what I will say to that is, because of Kent State's style of play, which is defensive, and their history of playing good teams, I would slow down on that. I do agree. This is a game, obviously, that Indiana will be favored in and that Indiana should win. But you look at Kent State, they played at Charleston, which is an NCAA tournament team that a lot of people are going to pick to win their first round game. I think they're a 12 seed. They lost 74-72. They played at Houston. All these games are, in the non-conference schedule. They played Houston at Houston. They lost 49-44. They played Gonzaga at Gonzaga. They played Gonzaga at Gonzaga, lost 73-66. And so what that tells you is this team can play good teams in tough environments. Again, those were road games, and they kept it close. Now, they didn't win, but if I had to, guess just my initial reaction of what I think is going to happen in this game, I would guess it probably looks something like that. And it's maybe a little bit closer than Indiana fans want. But this is a Kent State team that has proven they can play good teams in tough environments close. Couldn't get over the hump and win any of them. And I think this is an Indiana team that, typically if they're, in a good spot in a close game, they've done pretty well this year. But just beware of being overconfident, I think, about how this game is going to go.
I will say this about the Gonzaga game. That was when Gonzaga was really struggling at the beginning of the year. It did not look like a Gonzaga team that we've seen in the past. So I think that one may be a little inflated given how Gonzaga looks now. But the Houston game, to play Houston toe-to-toe, essentially, 49-40, that must have been horrible to watch, quite frankly. Yeah. But, Charleston's a really good team, and they lost by 2 to them. So, there's some results on that record that make you believe, okay, they can play with anybody, really, if they play their game.
As Jim says in the chat, there's no game or opponent that I feel good about Indiana winning without issue. So
that's pretty much where we're at too, buddy.
Perhaps fair. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have a special guest here with us on this edition of the Assembly Call. It is the great Rick Bozich. Rick, how are you?
I'm good. Kent State's a dangerous team, man.
They are. So give us...
I kind of felt like whoever Indiana got in that range, 12-13, was going to be a dangerous team anyway, and it wasn't going to feel super comfortable. So I guess it's just what we expected.
Yeah, I think the two teams I thought would be the worst draws for them would be Kent State and Iona, so they didn't get Iona. But Rick Pitino is going to also be in Albany, so it's going to be a very interesting regional.
So, okay, guys, I think, one of the big storylines here coming out of this is, of course, the Senderhoff-Sampson connection here in Indiana's region. Do you guys want to give just the quick refresher for those who may have forgotten, or for maybe the newer Indiana fans who don't quite know all of that backstory, so they're up to speed on all the storylines that they're going to hear ad nauseum for the next 3 or 4 days?
I was there for that, but I will cede it to Rick because he was a beat writer about that team.
Rob Senderoff was the top recruiter that Kelvin Sampson had on his staff when he came to IU, along with, I think it was Jeff Meyer, and I forget who the third guy was. Dockich came later, but he had a recruit from Kentucky by the name of Bud Mackey, who never came to town. And, McCallum, that's right. Bud Mackey, who was from Kentucky, who had some off-the-court issues and never came to town. And then when Kelvin got fired for text messaging Robbie Hummel and Demetrius McCamey and Evan Turner and all those dudes, whoever it was, too many times. Senderoff was part of the group. I think he was mentioned in some of the allegations, right? Wasn't he out for a while of the game? And then he was the
one. He was the one facilitating the 3-way calls. So technically, Senderoff would call the recruits because Sampson wasn't allowed to, and then they would just so happen that Sampson would be either in the room or they would connect him via a third phone. It was a way around a rule they all knew they were breaking. Right. But Senderoff was at the center of that, and then they dumped Senderoff, and I think didn't Dockich replace Senderoff, didn't he?
That's right. He was the first man overboard. You're right, Brian.
They dumped him like right at the beginning of the season because as all this started to come out, and Dockich stepped in.
But he's been there now. He's been there like 12 years, I think. This is his program, and he's been successful. He's had a bunch of 20-win seasons. He's a good coach. They've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 20-win seasons under Rob Senderoff. Yep. I don't know if they've had any success in the NCAA tournament or not, but and I think he thought he was going to have a good team this year, and that's why he scheduled the way he did, as you guys mentioned, playing Gonzaga, playing Houston. They didn't lose any home games. They did finish second in the MAC to to Toledo, but I watched the game last night instead of watching Duke and Virginia, and they beat Toledo pretty decisively in the championship game of the MAC tournament. I mean, Indiana should beat them. I mean, they should be favored to beat them. They've got, I don't think Kent has anybody to match up with Trace Jackson Davis, and that's typically the way it is when you're a Mid-American Conference school. You don't have the elite type centers, but I'm sure they've got very good guards, and they've been tested all year long. And so if Indiana comes in and doesn't play with energy the way they did in part of that game against Penn State, they'll certainly have their hands full.
Well, and I think in a tournament setting, momentum is such a big. I know some people say momentum doesn't matter. The analytics, the statistics matter. Momentum matters in a tournament because you're tired. At the end of the season, you are worn out, and that sort of momentum will boost your energy. And if you come out slow and let an underdog believe in itself, that's when you get into trouble. And so Indiana's actually started pretty well the last couple games, which had been a problem, before. Their starts have been good, but it feels like after that starting adrenaline wears off, they have these lulls after about 5 to 10 minutes. And then the offense goes to pot, and the other team, they allow other teams back in it. So I think it's just going to be a consistent energy and effort is really going to be the thing that'll win the day here, because you're right. They don't match. Kent State doesn't match up man to man with Indiana. But if you allow a team to believe that they do, that's where you get in trouble.
And as you guys mentioned, the last 2 days on the show, you can't have Galloway no-show again the way he did in Chicago. I mean, he made one basket at the very end of the game against Penn State. Kopp's got to be more productive. Race has got to play better than he played. I thought yesterday he was a little lethargic. I think Woodson thought he was lethargic too, because he benched Galloway and Thompson very quickly in the second half, because I didn't think he thought they were, when they got beat on a couple of those offensive rebounds by one of the worst offensive rebounding teams in the country. I think Mike Woodson was kind of alarmed by that. But the second thing I'll say, though, is if they can win the game, I mean, Miami as a 5 seed, their best inside player, they just lost him.
Yeah.
I think he's out for the year. And they got really.
Oh, is he really?
I
with
think
the ankle?
So.
Wow.
Yeah. And if you've got, Nigel Pack, and you've got Isaiah Wong, Larrañaga, as we all know, is a really good coach. I mean, they won. They were the number 1 seed in the ACC tournament. I know the ACC was down this year, but they were the 1 seed. But they're without their top inside guy. So, that could be a more favorable matchup than most 5 seeds are in this tournament.
Yeah, that's interesting. Getting back to Kent State, you look at them, and obviously we'll kind of, dig a little deeper into Kent State, and probably try and find someone from Kent State to come on here, and we'll bring Coach Tonsoni in here in just a second and get his thoughts. But I just wanted to piggyback on what you guys said about Kent State, just some early matchup stuff. They are not a big team. Their average height is 345th in the country.
Right.
I think their tallest guy is 6'9", but they have a couple of high usage guards. One is Sincere Carey, the other Malik Jacobs. And the concern with those guys is they both draw fouls. Sincere Carey draws 4.5 fouls for 40 minutes. Malik Jacobs 5.4. And so, Sincere Carey for them plays 92 minutes. And obviously Indiana's a team with Jalen Hood-Schifino that has a high usage guards that plays a lot of minutes. Staying out of foul trouble is going to be obviously big for Indiana's guards in this game, and continuing to take advantage of the advantage that they have inside in the post, which Indiana didn't do against Penn State, will also be important. But we'll get into the matchups a lot more on that coming up. But first, let's bring in the coach, Brian Tonsoni, from Delphi Bracketology and the Assembly Call, of course. Coach, how did Delphi Bracketology do? And what are your initial thoughts on Indiana's draw?
I think we did pretty well. If our math works out, which I'm not a great math person, we had our second best score that we ever did, 363.
Wow.
So we feel pretty good about that. We had some seeds off. We had 48 correct, and we only missed 2 teams more than 1 seed line off. So very proud of our efforts.
That's awesome.
And we'll see where that lies. Our best ever was 369. We finished third 2 years ago. And when we won it, it was 351. So pretty good for us. The kids just left. I just shoot them out. So if you see anyone running down the stairs for some shoes or phones that they left, I apologize.
Or dancing on the porch, maybe?
Yeah. So I think it's pretty good. I haven't really had a chance to look at matchups and things like that, but I think my initial thought was it's pretty good overall for Indiana. I think Miami and their guards pose a little bit of an issue, just a quick thought down the road, and then you match up with a great defensive team in Houston, but they had a key injury this week. So, there's some things that I look forward to diving into it. And one thing that's nice is it was a no-sweat selection Sunday for Indiana Hoosier fans, which is enjoyable.
Coach, what do you think of Kent State?
I think I've watched them quite a bit this year. The MAC was pretty good basketball. Toledo was in there. Akron was finished down the line a little bit. Ball State played well. So I think if they went through that tournament, I don't know their personnel. I'm going to get ready to go study it and look at it. But those are kind of teams that can, really cause some problems. I think, anytime the 12 to 13, if you get a tough run or you're not playing well, these are good basketball teams. But Kent State had a run for a while and then had a little bit of a lull, if I remember right. And then they came on strong here in the tournament.
Let's bring in the good doctor, Galen Clavio from Crimson Cast. We've even got his music here to bring him in properly. Galen, your thoughts on Indiana's draw, and how did you do bracket-wise?
A little bit behind the fine folks at Delphi Bracketology, but if I'm counting right, we had a 356 this year, which is our best ever. Had every team but one picked correctly. I think, like everybody else on the planet, we had Rutgers in instead of Nevada, and actually had 67 of the 68 within one of actual. We just didn't hit quite as many exacts. So still pretty pleased with how things turned out on that front. I think it's actually, of all of the potential draws, if looking at the way everything shook out, this is probably the best Indiana could have possibly expected. They get a Kent State team that, while certainly I think they're a good team, I don't think that they are like overwhelmingly great. And I also think that their struggles from shooting behind the 3-point line, they're only a 33% team. That's exactly what Indiana wants to see. They do not want to play a team that's going to, back up their defense and put them in a position where they're allowing shots from outside. I was looking at Eric Haslam's website, Indiana, a 4-point favorite on a neutral floor against Kent State, which that's pretty good considering they would have only been a point favorite if they were against Oral Roberts, for instance. Then as far as Miami, that's a team that certainly has got some pieces that I like, but I've watched a lot of Miami. That's my second team, basically, having worked down there for a while. There are other teams I would have rather avoided than Miami. I think that's actually a fairly decent draw for IU. I think they match up okay with them. So, I like where Indiana's at, and I'm just pleased that the work Indiana did throughout the course of the season ended up being rewarded in the seeding procedure, as a lot of people had decided to dump them down the seed line a bit after what happened in the last 24 hours.
Well, this is a good time now, as we have our friend from the Back Home Network here to talk about the sponsor of the Back Home Network, which is Home Field Apparel. And did you guys see what Home Field is doing, what they just announced? Which is, let me go look up the tweet here and see exactly what they're calling it. It's like Mystery Box Mania. Or Mystery Mania something. Mystery Mania subscription box.
That's the text that I got. Okay, I'm seeing
it. Yes, so it is Mystery Mania subscription box. So you sign up for this, and you're going to receive 6 shirts total. It's 5 mystery tees from tourney teams. So it's all tourney teams, and you get a mystery tee, the size you get to choose, and an original Home Field Champs tee, which is exclusive to this promo. And each tee is 40% off the regular price. And so you're going to get sent 3 shipments, one each weekend, with 2 surprise tees. Who knows? You could get a Kansas t-shirt. You could get an Iona t-shirt. You could get Furman. It could be, whatever schools they have, they could be in here if they're in the NCAA tournament. And so you can go there and sign up. I'm definitely signing up for this. If you go to Assembly Call Twitter, I just tweeted it out. So it is the Mystery Mania subscription box. If you like and trust Home Field Apparel and you're just like, Home Field doesn't miss, just send me a shirt because I know it's going to be awesome and I'll wear it, kind of like, Coach Tonsoni's kind of life philosophy, then, you should sign up for this. It'll be fun, and you'll get some fun shirts, and you get the excitement of a surprise and not knowing what's coming, and 3 weeks of getting to open this up. And it's like Christmas. I mean, March is already like Christmas because all the wonderful basketball, but this makes it even more so. So go check that out. It's the Mystery Mania subscription box. I'm sure if you go to homefieldapparel.com, you'll see it, but you can also go to the Assembly Call Twitter, and you will see it there. Let's bring in another member of our team here, Coach Marlowe, who will be hosting the watch party for our private community members watching the women's tournament draw. But Coach Marlowe, give me your initial thoughts on Indiana's draw and how you think the Hoosiers will handle it.
I think I agree with Galen. I think that, and Brian as well, I think that it's a good matchup. It's better than Oral Roberts. That was the one I did not want to match up with was Oral Roberts. But I look at them and they don't have much size. Their biggest kid I can see, at least listed on the roster, is 6'8". But I do worry that I look at their team stats and they force about 16 to 17 turnovers a game, which leads me to believe that they're fairly quick and active. And that's been an issue for us to guard those types of players. But overall, you look at their KenPom numbers, I think they were 110 on KenPom and offensive efficiency. And so those have been kind of the teams we've been okay with. They're defensively, they're top 40 according to KenPom, but we've really kind of been okay with those teams. So I like that. I like the matchup with Miami. It'll be interesting to see if their big kid is going to be out the first weekend of the tournament. He got hurt in the very first minute or so of the ACC championship game last night. And then, you get to the Sweet 16 the second weekend, anything can happen. And if Sasser's not healthy, Houston, I won't say is vulnerable, but that matchup becomes a little better without Sasser in the lineup.
Yeah, it's a good point about Kent State. Defensively, they don't have a ton of size, but they are 31st in the country in block percentage. They're 20th in the country in steal percentage and 20th in the country in turnover percentage. So that would suggest that they are active, that they are disruptive, and that is something that has harmed this Indiana team because at times Indiana gets very loose with their ball handling. And they obviously are not going to be able to do that. And hopefully, with the pressure of an NCAA tournament, there's a little bit more focus. But that is certainly something, that could be a potential worry here as you look at this Kent State matchup. I'm curious, Coach and Galen, what were kind of the biggest surprises for you when it comes to maybe someone that was seeded? I know, here at our house, or we are a Hoosier Aggie house. When Texas A&M came up as a 7 seed, we were both bewildered and surprised. And then, of course, we saw that they had a potential second-round matchup against Texas. And it's like, oh, yeah, I'm sure that was a coincidence. So that was the biggest surprise for us. It felt like A&M certainly should have been over Kentucky. But I don't know. I'm curious to hear what you guys thought was the biggest surprises of the day. Galen, we'll start with you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was a little surprised, but not overly so with A&M. And they were kind of in the same boat as Duke, where it's like, how much does that late momentum really bump you that far up? But the difference between Duke and A&M was that A&M had some horrific losses on their resume. They had, I think, 2 quad 4 losses that they suffered back in December, and I think that weighed them down a little bit. I think my biggest surprises overall in terms of seeding were, essentially a lot of it comes down to like how the 8s and the 9s end up always kind of being flipped from what you would expect. And that's a really frustrating one. There wasn't anything like outlandish there. I thought that the committee might overseed Utah State because their metrics and everything looked pretty good compared to the rest of the field, even though the actual games themselves did not. A lot of people had Utah State as a 12. They ended up as a 10. I had them as a 9. I think I overcompensated there a little bit. Kentucky is a 6. I think you could make an argument for them as a 7. Certainly, I don't know that they were any necessarily better than Texas A&M was at the end. But honestly, this was probably, of the last 8 or 9 brackets I've seen, this was the group of seedings that I've found to be kind of the least outlandish. You kind of get a sense that the committee, and this is an important thing to keep in mind, it's not one person with their own peccadillos deciding that they're going to like favor certain criteria over another. It's essentially a decision. And once you start thinking that way, this seems like exactly what the committee would have done. They compromised on a bunch of things. I do think the one thing that was interesting was that they didn't overweigh statistics like KenPom. If they had, I think UConn would have been a 3. I think Tennessee might have even been a 3. They did seem to balance those things pretty well. Coach, what about you? What were your thoughts?
Well, I just want to say real quick, I just want to jump in and say, clearly it's because this selection committee had the best leadership of any selection committee.
By the way, when did they move them to Carmel? I'm confused. Like, they used to be in the Marriott downtown, and now what are they at, like a La Quinta off of 31? I mean, what happened there?
That I don't know, but credit, by the way, if you didn't know, it's Chris Reynolds, obviously from Indiana, played at Indiana in the early 90s, who was the selection committee chair. Did a great job. Coach Tonsoni, over to you.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything extremely surprising. Obviously, the ones you didn't get right, you're a little surprised by, but they were in the ballpark. So when you make a mistake, you had Auburn at a 9, and then you debated if you wanted to move someone up to a 9, who's going to move down. So when you're if most of your selections are, as a bracketologist, correct or one seed line off, you're splitting hairs. Maybe 1 or 2 overall seed lines, 1 through 68, can make the difference. 36 and 37 are 2 different seed lines, but they're virtually real tight and real close. So, I don't know that there's a surprise. It does reveal the process a little bit. The fact that North Carolina State was not in the play-in game means they were voted in before the Final Four, and then once they're in that spot, it's the same thing as Michigan last year. Michigan was 17-13, got voted in as maybe the 39th or 40th team, and then they lose the first game. Well, they're in, and unless you make a committee push to reconsider and take them back out, which I don't know how easy that is to do, you're just going to put them down at the lowest non-play-in game spot. I think that happened with North Carolina State. We dropped them today for Nevada because we thought there are a bunch of teams with 4 quad 1 wins and kind of 4 or 5 quad 2, and there's a lump of them together, and North Carolina State was not. So when we had to take one team out, we just took the team out with, that was the surprise for me, that they were not that they were in, because we were considering them in, but they were not in the play-in game was probably the biggest surprise for me. But every one of these selections, I think, makes sense to some extent. We had Texas A&M on the 7 line until this week, and we jockeyed, Kentucky there for a while. Then we put Creighton there for a while, and all those teams are really close. So I think the committee, does a good job overall. It's a tough process, but not a whole lot of surprises.
Ryan, what are your thoughts on Nevada and your coaching hero getting into the field?
I think it's a terrible decision, and whoever made it should be fired immediately. No, I honestly, I was surprised. I hadn't seen Nevada in a projection in a while, so yeah, no. I was surprised they made it.
I'll say one thing. I had kind of disregarded them, and I went back this morning, and I was like, I'm going to go through every outside the bracket team and just make sure. And I looked back at Nevada's numbers, and I was actually kind of impressed with what I saw comparatively. I didn't think they'd make it in. I really didn't. And if they had made it in, I thought it would be at the expense of like Pitt, not Rutgers. But I think what bit Rutgers was the lack of any like really good action on the road outside of the win they had at Purdue and the number of losses that they had. And that's ultimately what also kept Oklahoma State out, I think. Or it was just that they lost too many games. Nevada didn't. Nevada won a decent number of games against some pretty good teams. But yeah, it was just kind of surprising because they had kind of dropped off the radar, not just due to the San Jose State loss, but a couple of losses they suffered going in. Yeah. But they've done to be fair, going back and looking at it, they had done enough to at least be in the conversation. Probably more so than North Carolina had. And I think that's the one that I certainly was like, if the committee's going to put somebody in that I'm not expecting, it's going to be the Tar Heels. I certainly didn't think it'd be the Wolfpack. But I think there's some kind of like constitutional requirement that a Mountain West team be in the play-in games. So that filled that issue. They took Wyoming's spot from last year.
Yeah, we took a vote today via texting from all our group, and we all voted. I was going to go a different direction, but they said Nevada. That's where having a committee kind of helps. You see a few more eyes. But the Rutgers situation, I was championing this for 2 weeks, that they weren't the same team without their Mawot Mag, and he wasn't their superstar, but they were like 3-8 or 3-7 down the stretch, and it was a different team than beat Purdue, and so I was championing that all along, and then I fell victim to that, they look good in the tournament stuff. And so as that committee started on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, that was the same question that I had posed and didn't follow. That's one of the decisions that I was frustrated with, because I was out on Rutgers a long time, and then we put them back in. Those are the ones that bother you as a bracketologist, where you had it right for the longest time, and then you rethink something at the end.
Let's talk about the Big Ten, Galen and Coach. I'm curious how you thought the Big Ten was treated. As expected, Purdue gets a 1, Indiana with a 4, and then a whole lot on the 7 through 10 line. So I'm curious how you thought the Big Ten got treated, if you thought those seeds were deserving, and just kind of by the looks of it, if there are any kind of matchups or paths of those Big Ten teams that you see as being one that they might be able to take into the Sweet 16, because obviously the narrative now for a while in the NCAA tournament is Big Ten gets all these teams and they don't get to the second weekend. Coach Tonsoni, we'll start with you and then go to Galen.
I think Penn State could have been a 9. I understand why. We had them as a second team, second to last team on Wednesday night when we had our final meeting and tried to set things up. So they did get a boost of a whole seed line. But anytime you put together 4 or 5 quad 1 wins in a row, that's where the procedure sometimes gets in the way, with Penn State playing Saturday afternoon and then Sunday. And I thought they really showed down the stretch that they could play good basketball. And I'm not a proponent of the last 10 being instituted back in, how you did in the last 10, because that's a scheduling nightmare. If you get screwed on the schedule down the stretch, I don't think that's fair. But I do think there's some momentum that needs to be considered. Like, they beat Illinois 3 times, and Illinois is seated higher than they are. And it's not a conference. Everyone's an independent contractor here, and you compare them to other teams. So there's good reason why Illinois, with its 2 wins in the non-conference, is probably ahead. But we decided today to put Penn State up at the 9 and have Illinois on the 10, along with Auburn on the 10 line, because we thought Penn State had earned that right. And if you're going to have games, they need to be part of it. And I'm not being – I think they do count a little bit, but that's the one in the Penn State. We had Michigan State a 7 for a long time, ended up on the 8 seed line, so we understand all of that. Every Big Ten team is seeded fairly, I believe. I would have liked to see Penn State a little bit higher.
I echo most of that. I just think Penn State left it too late to start winning those games at the end of the day. And yeah, they swept Illinois, but I mean, Indiana swept Purdue, and Penn State swept Indiana. I mean, a lot of the individual head-to-head matchups sometimes don't matter as much when you think about the holistic picture of each of these teams. And I think ultimately
we just had them next to each other. And that's when it swayed us.
Yeah, and I agree. This is exactly how I had it going seeding-wise. Purdue as a 1, Indiana as a 4, and then a bunch of teams in that kind of 7, 8, 9, 10 range, because that's really how they looked compared to the rest of the country. As far as pathways and opportunities, I mean, I think both Indiana and Purdue have golden opportunities sitting in front of them. Purdue somehow, as the 4th 1 seed, got the worst 2 seed according to the seed list in Marquette. Marquette was 8th. On the seed list. They got the 2nd worst 3 seed in Kansas State, and they got the second best 4 seed in Tennessee, but that's a Tennessee team that is dealing with a significant injury, and also I think is probably the least likely to do something in the tournament. And so
this is the theme of Purdue's season.
It is.
Purdue's got Duke, don't they?
Well, they do. But again,
Dusty May before that.
But in terms of the big teams, in terms of the protected seeds in their region, they have by far the weakest of the 4 regions, if you add up the seed numbers from the 1, 2, 3, and 4s. Now, yes, Duke is looking challenging, but I would warn everybody that all the numbers, all the metrics have told us that the ACC is crap. And Duke has improved their profile significantly, largely by beating ACC teams over the last month and a half. So I don't really know how good they are. They looked good against Virginia, but I think there were about 90 teams in the country that would have looked good against that Virginia team last night. So I think Purdue has a pretty good. Yeah, sorry. So I think Purdue's overall got a really good path if they can take advantage of it. And as far as Indiana's concerned, we've talked about them a lot. But I mean, again, Houston, as good as they looked metrics wise, just hasn't played that many top level teams. And we've already talked about Indiana versus Miami or Kent State or Drake for that matter. I think that they have the ability to win any of those matchups. And so those would be the ones I'd looked at and say, at least for the top 2 teams in the Big Ten, they got treated pretty well.
I guess I'm going to disagree a little bit. I'm not the bracketologist, but I wouldn't want to play Marquette right now. I wouldn't want to play Memphis right now, and I wouldn't want to play Duke. Winning matters to a certain degree. I guess that's the coach in me. When you're hot and you're on a streak, confidence builds and success breeds success. So I'm not sure I'm not, if I was a Purdue fan, I'm not sure I like that draw very well, but that's just me.
That's fair, but I mean, would you rather play Arizona or Texas at this point? Yeah. I mean, that's the other options at the 2 line.
Yeah. Two ways to look at that Marquette. 2 ways to look at that Marquette thing is Marquette doesn't have a ton of usable size, but they do press and pressure the ball, and that's something that Purdue is terrible with. So, I mean, that for that reason, on a pure matchup basis, I can see the pitfall there. But again, I do agree that Marquette, of those 2 seeds, if you're just looking at it plain what they can do on the court, probably not the one that scares me the most. But
I'm not making a qualitative judgment. I'm just going to let the seed list, which is when they rank everybody 1 through 68. Marquette was the worst of the 2 seeds. That's all, and that's normally not what happens as the 4th 1 seed. Like normally you're drawing the best of the 2 seeds. Or the second best of the 2 seeds. They really kind of lucked out because of the region that they got put in.
Right, exactly.
So why did that happen? Was that because of bracketing rules?
Yeah, basically,
geography.
So they decided Alabama was the number 1 overall, and I know Jeff's got a question on that, which we'll let him get to in a second. So that put them in the South. Houston going to the Midwest was a real head scratcher on a number of levels, and I didn't think that Chris's explanation was particularly good on the post game or the post draw show. But Houston, he basically, if I parsed it down right, and Ryan can correct me if I'm wrong, it was basically that they hadn't had as many chances to play against quad 1 teams, and so they hadn't lost as many games against quad 1, even though Kansas had won like significantly more. I think this is where the committee doesn't want to say, well, Houston was our number 1 team in the net, and they were clearly top in terms of metrics and predictive statistics. So therefore, we would have felt weird not putting them at least as the number 2 and giving them some geographical protection. So I think they were trying to cover for that, but it still doesn't make a lot of sense even when you think about it that way.
Yeah, it just.
By the way, Galen, for future reference, you don't have to give Ryan permission to correct you if you're wrong.
Not at all.
He will just do it.
No, you're exactly right though. That's what it sounded like. It sounded like the excuse was, well, yeah, they don't have as many big wins because they don't play as many good teams. And it's like, well, yeah, you can't hold that against the other teams, though. I mean, I get you can't really blame. It's like when Gonzaga went undefeated in the regular season. It was like, we can't blame them because their conference isn't great. I mean, it's kind of,
But you don't have to reward.
But you don't have to reward them. I agree completely. Yeah.
But he did make the point that Houston was competitive in all their losses. Kansas got blown out 4 or 5 times.
Well, but Kansas played so many more good teams is the point.
Yeah,
I mean,
you can't get blown out.
Sure you can. I mean, Houston played a grand total of 9 games against quad 1. And to me, that's great. That's all well and good. But, of those teams that they played in quad 1, you're talking about Oregon, Cincinnati, Central Florida, teams that didn't make the field. And you look at what Kansas played, they won 19 games against teams in the field. And you go down the list of their quad 1 wins, there's the only teams on there that didn't make the field were Oklahoma State and Oklahoma, and that only accounted for 2 of the games.
And a lot of people think Oklahoma State should have gotten in. So,
well, that brings me.
Kansas should have been the number 1 overall, and then Alabama, and then Houston. If winning should matter, but winning in numbers matters. I'm a guy who doesn't mind losses. Like, if you play 31 games, you're going to lose a game or you're going to have a bad game. Show me who you can beat and how consistently you can beat people. And I think the metrics are nice. I think they're a nice piece. I think it's better than the RPI, to be honest with you. But sometimes those metrics do get in the way of true evaluation of how good a basketball team is.
Let me just say this.
I'm confused. One thing real quick, Ryan. To say, well, hey, Kansas got blown out a few times. I mean, Alabama, who was your number 1 overall, lost by 27 to
Oklahoma
on the road. They lost by 15 on a neutral court to UConn. I mean, so some blowouts apparently matter more than others.
Yeah, one thing I'm going to say about this is, as a non-bracket guy, a non-bracketologist who doesn't do this, who follows you guys for my information, I believe.
Are you Jay Horry?
No, I'm not.
Is your name Jay?
I would never tell you your business, unlike a certain mediocre listener. No, what I'll say is the thing that's confusing to me is somebody who's on the outside follows what you guys do, and then just when the bracket comes out, I'm like, okay, tell me what it means. Is that there's no set criteria, and it seems every year it changes, and they don't tell people what matters. And I think that bothers me, because it's, if you know going in, hey, you win big games on the road, we are going to reward you. You schedule tough, we are going to reward you. This is what matters more than this. And they rank the criteria before the season starts. I think it's easier for everybody to understand what happens. It seems like every year at the end, they're like, well, we're shocked. They valued conference wins, but they didn't value non-conference. This year, they valued non-conference road games. And I'm not saying it has to be the same every year, but there needs to be some hierarchy of criteria so that teams know what to go for and know how to.
You are right, as usual, Ryan. I mean, I get tired of saying that over and over again. You are right.
Every year.
But we're out of a job if it's set. If it becomes a standings board, then this isn't there. And there's an interest in college basketball. We're talking about it, debating it right now. But if we knew exactly, then we're just talking about Kent State moving on and going eating some donuts.
Well, one last point on that. I'm not saying it has to be solidly ranked the same every single year, but give us a group of things that matter the most. And that's.
I agree. I agree.
Here's the thing, I think you're right, Ryan. But I also think that what happens in these situations is these resumes of these teams are often so fundamentally different. It's not comparing apples to oranges.
You're
it's
absolutely
comparing it's apples to dolphins. It's like two things that don't even belong in the same room together. And what you end up with is a situation where you have a committee. There's 12 people on the committee. 2 or 3 people rotate off every year and 2 new people go on. And that means that even if you said at the beginning of the year, here's the criteria that we really want you to focus on, ultimately, there's going to be different perspectives because of the way the procedure goes. And I think I get it. I know. I mean, it's one of the thing that most lay people don't grasp about this is it's not a person picking it. It's a committee voting on lists of teams. And so you end up with all these weird compromises. And it's like, why is Iowa State a 6 and Tennessee's a 4? Because there's a lot of between those two teams that should be about the same. But you end up with this reordering that doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think that frustrates a lot of people. I agree with Coach, though. Ultimately, a cottage industry has sprung up around trying to guess an imperfect science. And it's terrible math, but it's great drama, and that's ultimately, I think, what everybody wants.
No, it's just in the wake of all the frustration. That's what I say is, okay, give us 4 things that we should all be looking for. You don't have to tell us it perfectly line it up, like it's going to be the RPI or it's going to be the net. Like you don't have to do that, but tell us what's going to be most important this year, so that we can kind of game out who.
But in some ways, Ryan, they do. I mean, you got to win games. Win your quad 1, win your quad 2, win some on the road, and have good metrics. Play good basketball. I mean, it is, and yet there isn't. What gets frustrating is when you compare one team and it seemed like road wins mattered, and then all of a sudden the next decision, it was they had too many losses, and it doesn't seem inconsistent. But it really can't when, as Galen said, the resumes are so unique that when you get 2 different resumes together and you're talking about 36 overall or 37, the difference between a 9 and a 10, now you got to take a vote and a discussion between 12. And I've been privy to it when we have a group of 8 down here today, or text messaging, and 5 people want Nevada and 2 people want North Carolina State and 3 want this, and then all of a sudden the stuff gets thrown out. And then ultimately it comes down to a vote, and that team gets the spot that was being debated. And then Chris Reynolds got to go on TV and explain that, and how's that different. So there's reason behind it.
And I also get that some of it's not logical. Some of it, these guys are going to pick teams based on what they think they look like too. If it's even between 2 teams, pretty much, They're going to say which team's better and take the better, who they think is the better team. And that may come down to a split vote. You never know. And so it does hinge on this wire that's so close. And so I think when teams are upset they don't get in, I completely understand, because again, there's no set metric and a lot of it's incredibly subjective. Indiana has been on the wrong end of that sometimes, a few times. But at the same time, you're right. I mean, there is sort of you're at the mercy of these teams. And if you leave it to or these guys, and if you leave it to the mercy of the committee, whether or not you get in, you probably don't deserve to be in necessarily. So, that's sort of the end result of this.
Hey, I'll modify my question a little bit that I had for Brian and Galen. Then I'll listen to your answer, and then I'm going to hop out of here and get ready for the women's show that we have with the community coming up at the top of the hour. But a lot of speculation this morning by media, not necessarily guys like you, but a lot of media people that were dropping IU to a 5. And yet we were the number 15 overall seed, so solidly a 4 seed. Were you surprised that they were the number 15 overall seed? And
I wasn't.
Thanks for having me. I'm going to listen to the answer, then I'm hop out.
I wasn't surprised because since they were 13 at the reveal and they went 500 or a little one over 500 since the reveal, had some great wins, had a really bad loss to Iowa in there. So I wasn't surprised at all. We all fight recency bias. We were talking here before I dismissed the students. We made some changes today and we tell ourselves we weren't going to do that, and then we do it, and we've done that for every year. And then we focus on those mistakes that we missed. But we moved Baylor to a 3 today. So I told the guys, don't get disappointed and just look at the ones we missed. We also made some choices that were correct late because we're different than the committee. So I wasn't surprised at all. But there's a lot of recency bias that media and everyone fall into, that when you lose a game, you got to drop, and when you win, you got to go up. And it really gets a little more tight as the conference tournaments end on Saturday and Sunday. So I was pretty comfortable. I thought there was a slight chance if people thought Iowa State beating Baylor twice or Duke with their momentum and they were looking for a team. I thought it was going to be Xavier, to be honest with you, and they ended up being a 3 seed. So it was a little closer than what getting to a 5 than what I thought, but I wasn't surprised we were a 4.
I'll echo that. I actually had Indiana as 15th on my seed list, so I congratulate the committee on getting that right. But no, overall, look, I think the biggest challenge that Indiana was facing, and where I think a lot of people were dropping them, was A, recency bias, and B, Indiana was 30th in the net coming into today. And that's supposed to be the NCAA sorting mechanism, and 30th is like an 8 seed. So this is where, again, going back to what Ryan mentioned, where these criteria come together. Indiana had just the right combo. I think I mentioned this on our podcast this morning. Indiana was like a little bit of something off of each of the buffet areas that you would want. They had road wins. They had quad 1 wins. They had no bad losses. They had 22 wins overall. They had a bunch of things that you would have liked. They didn't have all in one area or another. They ended up being a good bellwether for what the committee was looking for, and I think they were solidly on the 4 seed as a result.
Let me ask you guys this question. Because the selection committee did their reveal, and Indiana was a 4 seed. If I remember correctly, they were the top 4 seed. And so that was kind of, I remember when that happened, it's like, okay, we're in pretty good shape, even though people weren't quite sure. Do you think without that, you would have felt as comfortable keeping Indiana up as a 4? Like, do you think that helped you say, okay, the committee is valuing some things that Indiana has? Or like you said, with a net of 30, would you have been a little bit more worried if you hadn't seen that come out at the reveal?
They've been doing the reveals for a decade now, Coach, and it does help because it at least gives you an opening sense of what the committee is thinking. Now, without that, it's hard to say. I mean, look, ultimately, Indiana had some really good wins, and they had good wins away from home, and those things have always traveled well. And I think where I would have been in a normal year, I wouldn't have said an 11-loss team was going to be a 4 seed, but this was not a normal year. A lot of teams had a lot of losses. Yeah. And so I think within the confines of this particular season, I would have absolutely had them right around that borderline of the 4 or 5, which again is just the difference between being the 16th and the 17th best teams on the seed list. Coach, what about you?
if you just pop in and look at the net for the first time this week and see them as a 30, you're probably going to have them lower. But where you watched them all year, and then you also realize that the Iowa loss dropped them from, I think, low 20s at the 27ers, maybe even got into the teens.
They haven't been up since then,
at one point.
They were like
and then you get beat
15 at one point. I think.
And that's where I like the net, but you can game it. You can game it by keeping your starters on late and winning by 20 instead of winning by 12, and your offensive efficiency. By some of your scheduling, if you schedule people and you pound them, then that embeds a nice spread of your offense and defensive efficiency. So I'd like to see it capped a little bit more or tweaked a little bit more, but I like it overall. But you can't just look at 30th and say, okay, that's a 6 or 7 seed. We use it as a placement. And then we look at the whole resume and say, is this team higher or better than its net or worse than its net compared to everything? And then we kind of go from there when we start placing teams. But we don't use it absolute. Now, we do look at trends, and I do think there are some trends from committee to committee, but you got to make sure your trend is not the outlier. Like Utah State was an outlier this year. Usually teams with that kind of net get up in the top 7 or 8, but you got to be careful that not just use the net as a placement tool. We kind of, our FAU was that way. The trend of putting Murray State and Wofford and Buffalo up in the 6 and 7 seed line cost us some, a couple points maybe because we had FAU as a 7 and they ended up as a 9. This committee felt differently than previous committees, so our trend analysis didn't pan out in that situation, and so we maybe misused the net a little bit in that situation. But yeah, if you look at it right away, you're going to see 30. You're going to think 7, 8 seed.
Here is, the other thing on Indiana's resume that helped, obviously, is no bad losses. They didn't take any in the non-conference schedule, and they didn't take any in Big Ten conference play. And so if you're looking for a reason to be confident going into this Kent State game, because trust me, over the next few days, you're going to hear a lot of reasons why Kent State is a good upset pick over Indiana. But one thing this Indiana team can really hang its hat on this year is they did not lose to bad teams. The lowest rated KenPom team that Indiana lost to was Northwestern at number 42. And so they lost to 42. Iowa's 37, Rutgers is 35. But they didn't lose to any teams ranked lower than that. Kent State currently 71st in KenPom. The closest proxy there on Indiana's schedule is Wisconsin, which was 76th. And if you project forward to Miami, they were just 40th in KenPom, and that is with their center, who they're not going to have. And
do we know that for sure?
That's Rick said. I think was it Rick Bozich that was just here that said he was out for the season? I think.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I haven't confirmed that. I don't know, but obviously, that would be big. And that's, to me, this Indiana team, Galen, has really struggled putting back-to-back efforts against good teams. Even when you look at that 5-game win streak, the first win in that streak was against Wisconsin at home. They're not a good team this year. Winning at Illinois, that's a huge win. But then you come home and you play Michigan State without Malik Hall. And then you go at Minnesota and you play Ohio State at home when they were just, playing terrible. And so that win streak, while impressive, you really beat like 1.5 good teams, depending on how you think about Michigan State at the time Indiana played them. And then after that 5-game stretch is when Indiana started playing no one lower than Michigan at 46th. And, they lost at Maryland. They won 3 in a row against Purdue, Rutgers, and Michigan. And then it's lose one, win one, lose one, win one. And so that's where, to me, I've kind of looked at this and said, this really feels like a team where the ceiling is the Sweet 16. Because you're going to play a team at first that's probably ranked somewhere 70th, 80th. That seems like a team Indiana should beat, even if it's a little closer than you would want. And then after that, unless the bracket just goes crazy, you're probably going to be playing two straight at least top 40 teams. And this team just hasn't really shown us that they can put together back-to-back efforts. Yeah. And so, the way I've looked at it for several weeks now is the Sweet 16 is it's the demonstrated ceiling of this team. Doesn't mean that they can't outdo that by, finally stringing together some efforts. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on that and how that kind of lays out now with the teams that Indiana, projects to play with this bracket setup.
Well, yeah, here's the thing. We talked about this on the podcast today. The inconsistency that Indiana's had, it's like, is this something that they will shake? And if it's something that they can shake and they can get consecutive good games, they really only need 2 good games in a row because then they can break and come back and they've got a whole new set of teams that they play. I do worry about, I worry about the first game, I think, more than anything else with this IU team, in that they have trouble rising to the occasion against teams that don't get them really juiced up. And that is a concern. I don't know how excited they're going to be to play Kent State. I think they'd get a lot more excited to play Miami, obviously. But I think there's nothing about Kent State in terms of personnel matchup that would concern me too much from an Indiana perspective. Yes, they present some problems, but anybody that you're playing at this level would present some problems. I think Indiana presents a lot of problems for Kent State that they're going to have trouble solving. And I think Indiana's been battle tested enough now that they're not going to be freaked out by it. They're going to play at 9:55 p.m.
Breaking news.
Just discovered that. So
they always put Indiana in the late slot for TV, man. Where's Purdue at 11:15 on Thursday?
Probably. I mean, whenever
Purdue plays 6:50 p.m.
Oh,
there you go. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's because they have a plan.
Okay, that's a little better for Purdue then.
Yeah, a little bit of prime time. But look, ultimately,
I'll say this: it's great for Indiana to get that extra day off. By the way, I think that's
the one thing I like though about this is that if they can get past these 2 teams and get to the Sweet 16, Kent State and either Drake or Miami, I think there's an equal chance they could play either one.
Without the center, Drake has a good chance to win that game.
They do, although I do think it's important to keep in mind that it feels like every year we pick 2 or 3 12 seeds or 13 seeds who are locks to beat whoever they're going to play, and then they lose.
And one usually wins.
Yeah,
it's not what you're thinking.
And I honestly, I think Miami without a center, Drake might be the perfect team for them to play because they don't have to worry about an interior presence. They can just focus on defending the perimeter, and I think they can do that. But anyway, if IU can get past the first 2 games, the fact that they would get to reset and almost certainly either play Houston, a 1 seed who everybody knows, or Iowa, or Auburn.
I'd rather play Houston.
But there'd be plenty for them to get up for in that game, and I think that ultimately they would be in a much better spot than, if it's a situation with this IU team where they're having to play like somebody that they haven't heard of or they can't get up for. That's one thing. But I think for IU right now, if they are as motivated as they say they are to try to do something in the postseason for the first time, this is the draw you would want for them, because there's enough along the way that is challenging but not like overly problematic. Yes, I know they've lost to Iowa twice already, but I don't think Iowa's actually making it through. I do like the chances of IU being able to turn themselves up. I just wonder with them, it's like the stumbling block's probably the first game. And that's where Mike Woodson's got to earn his money here over the next 5 days, getting his team up and ready for that and having them take it seriously for a full 40 minutes.
Guys, we need to stop the show for a moment and express a little bit of sadness for the end of North Carolina's season, as the preseason #1 team in the country did not make the NCAA tournament and has declined an NIT invitation. It seems like the problem for North Carolina all year long was they didn't enjoy playing with each other, and it seems like the thought of playing even one more game was too much for the Tar Heels. So they're going to start preparing for next season.
Shout out to friend of the program, Tate Frazier. It's a sad day.
Yes.
I actually have an interview with Tate that will be published tomorrow, and we did the interview before North Carolina got eliminated, so he was much more cheerful. So if you want a positive interview, if you want a negative one, turn into One Shining Podcast. But that will be released tomorrow on the Big Lead, so go read it.
What quick thoughts on that? That's pretty sad, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
it is.
Is there any defense for that? Like, hey, we didn't make the NCAA tournament. We're just taking our ball and going home.
They're not the first team to do it. Cincinnati announced a similar thing, and I don't know if they're actually going to go through with it. We're not going to play in the NIT either, which I didn't think the NCAA was letting teams do. But no, look, IU's played in the NIT. Not Kansas, but
gave up a home game.
Yeah, other teams. Well, God, yeah. At
least we played though.
The NIT is not beneath you, and for North Carolina of all teams, who quite frankly, flaunted academic rules in the NCAA for years, won a national championship, and then acted like they'd done nothing wrong, to suddenly be like, oh, we're too good to play in the NIT. I mean, give me a break.
I'll say this about that though, and opting out. I think it might be a case where players didn't want to play and would have just opted out. There's a chance they may not have had a team to go.
Let the young guys play then. I'm sure Baycott doesn't want to play, but
how many would you have if you're going to run with 7 guys to the NIT? That
get them experience.
It's a different world now than it was a few years ago, where guys would play the end of the season out, and now they don't. So I think there might be a case to be made for that. I agree with you though, Galen. I would have gone anyway. Let the walk-ons play. I don't care. But
I think that mentality is exactly why their season was torpedoed in the first place.
I would agree with you.
Well, they're jumping the ship and getting to work on their roster construction for next year. They have decisions whether to let people back or not. And this, you wonder if the program's like, we don't want you back. We're not going to go play with you. We don't want you back because it's been a hell of a 2 years of selfish basketball with one good tournament run. And that's some tough conversations you're going to have. But I think everyone except one can come back if they wanted to because of the COVID year. And I've heard a few podcasts where they've discussed, like, do you want them back? Does Davis want them back? And then you got to go to the transfer portal and get some recruits in and go young next year. And so I agree. If you got a chance to play, you should play. You are kind of crapping on the season, ending the season. If you get invited, you should go. But this has been torturous for them. I'm not feeling sorry for them, but
boo.
They're getting a jump start on who wants to be here and who doesn't, and who we want here and not. And let's get into some individual work and get this straightened out.
They also get a jump on contacting transfers and all that stuff.
Yep,
focusing on recruiting.
Well, yeah, I would hope that teams have support staff guys who can do that. That is a difference, Galen. That I think is important context for people to understand is when does the transfer portal open? I know some guys have already announced that they're in there. I didn't know if that was just grad transfer guys or if it's fully open and guys can start taking visits. But that happens concurrently with the NCAA tournament. And so if you're a team like Indiana that clearly is going to be active in the transfer portal, probably looking to fill 2, 3, 4 spots, your coaching staff needs to be focused on the game. And this is where a guy like Jordan Hulls, who's your recruiting coordinator, I would imagine the support staff guys are really going to have a lot of work cut out for them to be watching film, making contacts. And, at some point, the coaches probably are going to have to hop on a call or maybe take a visit with a priority transfer portal guy. So that does make it a little bit different now than it was in the past.
So it's a 60-day window now, and it opens tomorw.
Okay, there you go.
And actually, there's an interesting piece.
Why do they do it that way? Well, I guess they kind of have to let guys,
because you figure only about
season's over. That's why.
Only about 20% of the membership is playing in the NCAA tournament. They add another 10% for the NIT, but they added the window rather than having it be an endless thing because they wanted to have some kind of structure around it more than they had last year, but. It's interesting. There's a nice piece by Isaac Trotter from 24/7 about this, and there's a quote from Brad Underwood, and I'll just read his quote because I think it's pertinent. I guess I wish that it would start a little later than the day right after Selection Sunday. You'd hope that you don't have someone on your team as you're heading to the tournament who's looking at the portal, but I'd also be wrong to say that it won't happen. Somebody who isn't playing or getting minutes is going to be looking for a new destination. I'll be shocked if there's a tournament team not dealing with that. And look, you have to stay on top of transfers at every moment because that's essential in building a roster. So this is one of those things where it's like, I don't know. I get why they did it this way, but it also puts teams in the tournament at a little bit of a disadvantage because now you're having to have some awkward conversations with your own players while also trying to figure out how to win tournament games while also figuring out who you might get to transfer. So you better have a really solid unofficial support structure out there to try to make sure that you're keeping tabs of all of that.
All right, well, let's wrap things up here on this because we all want to go focus on the women's selection show where the Hoosiers are expected to be the number 2 overall seed opposite South Carolina. And yes, you better believe I'm wearing my Big Ten champ shirt from Home Field Apparel. Let's start with Coach Tonsoni. Everybody's now going to be scrambling to fill out their brackets. One bonus, I think, of the bracketology work that you do when you guys go to fill out your brackets, not that it makes you any better at filling out the brackets because it's all such a crapshoot anyway, but I think you guys do have a better understanding of the strengths and weaknesses, or at least the relative abilities of some of the lower seeds than, those of us like me and Ryan who don't pay that close attention to it. So, Coach Tonsoni, as you were going through this process, who were a couple of teams, seeded 10th or lower that you think kind of have the stuff to project that could be a Sweet 16 type seed, and maybe one from a big conference and one, from a lower conference that people should consider as a potential Cinderella?
No, we actually suck at filling out the brackets, to be honest with you. So,
overload. I feel the same way. Overload of info. You get because it's hard to say.
You can't get away from the information,
right?
And
that team was good. They had all these quad 1 wins, and then they go and they lose in the first round. I don't know.
The obvious serious answer to your question is you do like those 12 team seeds that are seeds 12 because they're the best teams of the smaller automatic conferences, and they're good basketball teams. So your Oral Roberts is a team. They got a tough matchup with Duke. So I think that could be problems. You look for momentum. A team like Utah State has played well, and they're a 10. Do they have a chance? I don't think they can get by Arizona at that spot. I don't think USC, Penn State and Texas A&M are going to play 7-10 seed line. Texas has a chance. They're really good, but man, they could be up and down if you're looking at the 10 seed line. I think those are teams quickly that I would say I don't think Boise State has much in them. 11 seeds weren't good this year. I mean, I don't know anyone who's hot or anything. Providence, I would say Providence has a chance because Ed Cooley is a really good coach, and they've won some games at home. And so, you're in the Big East as a big conference school at an 11, I think is there. And VCU as a 12. Really think VCU. I'm not sure who they're matched up with. I have to look real quick.
St. Mary's.
VCU and St. Mary's, and St. Mary's is good. And then don't be surprised at Drake. Those teams at the 12. But below that, there's a 13. Watch Kennesaw State. I think they guard a little bit, if I remember right. At the 14, they gave
That's
Indiana
the team Indiana played
pretty
earlier
good
this season.
Yeah, and it was like 11 or 12 points or something, and it was a little bit of a struggle. They play Xavier, and Xavier doesn't have Fremantle. So that's the kind of thing that's a recipe for a 14 to beat a 3. And that's what I have for you before scouring this for about 10 hours going forward. Furman.
Galen? Does anybody jump out to you?
A couple of teams that I would keep an eye on. I don't know how much this would be like Cinderellas per se. I got my eye on West Virginia. They play Maryland, who has not played well away from home. Then they probably get to play Alabama. And, West Virginia is a top 20 KenPom team. We're talking about a team that only lost to good teams all year. They struggled against Kansas a bunch, and I think that ended up kind of being their undoing as far as getting higher up the seed line. But I would not be pleased if I was Alabama having to play against West Virginia. I wouldn't be shocked to see them make it to the Sweet 16. In terms of double-digit seeds, so I'll say this. I think Utah State, another one that is pretty high up in the efficiency ratings. They looked pretty good in the Mountain West tournament. They've got a Missouri team who I think is really overrated, like overseeded. They are kind of your classic do no wrong sort of team, but I don't know if they're actually as good as they've gotten seeded. And then they play an Arizona team that is we think they're very good. That to me has always struck me as a team that could get knocked out a little bit early this year because I just don't know how well they're going to be able to handle something that they're not expecting. We saw that a couple of times with them in losses this year. So. Outside of that, I think all of the 12, 13, 14 seeds could do something, but to some degree, as I look at first blush here, I don't know how many of them are matched up effectively. I think actually VCU might have the best matchup of the 5-12s or 4-13s, as they're an aggressive style team playing a St. Mary's team that likes to slow it down. That might be a good matchup for the Rams.
Ryan, have you filled out your bracket yet? Do you have any?
Not yet.
Hot bracket opinions?
No. I'll say that Indiana has a path that can work for it. And I think that if anybody in that locker room is not super friggin' excited about what they've got ahead of them, they need to check their pulse. This is a really good chance for Indiana to make a run for the first time in a long time. And to be able to get that matchup against Houston, as Galen was saying, like there are games you get up for and games you don't. Houston has arguably been the best team in college basketball all year as far as performance goes. I know Kansas is probably the best team matching up against anyone, but Houston's been at the top the entire time and hasn't really suffered any bad losses. And if you can't get up for that game, I mean, you're crazy. Now, you're right. I think Galen's 100% right. Kent State's the test. To get them up for Kent State is going to be an issue because you're just thinking smaller conference team, lower seeded. We're supposed to win. We've got the All-American. You can't sleepwalk in that game. I think it helps that it's a night game for that. I think that'll really help I tend to think those night games help the higher seed because it's it's more a normal schedule than playing at noon. So I think it's just that evens out. But yeah, I think
prime time. Yeah.
Yes, and it's just more normal. It's like those Saturday afternoon games where nobody plays well, and teams eke it out. So I think that when you flatten everything and don't put them in an abnormal situation, it's better for the favorite. That said, Indiana's got to get up for that game, and then I think that the next game is gonna be easy to get up for. It's a chance to go to the Sweet 16. It's all of that stuff. Regardless of who they play. And if it's Miami, I think you certainly get up for it. But they've got a real good chance to make a run here. I know Houston is extremely good defensively, but Sasser's out. You've got size on them. You do some things well there. It's going to be on those role players, though. Everything Indiana does is going to be about the role players. The role players step up. Indiana's going to make a great run. We're all going to be very happy. If they don't, Indiana's going to struggle. That's the story of the season. It's been the same no matter who they play, no matter what the matchup is. If the role players step up, Indiana will win games in this tournament.
And we've now had 2 straight games where Indiana's best lineup is the one with Malik Reneau and Tamar Bates. So obviously those guys need to keep playing well, and then hopefully you can get Trey Galloway going again and get Race Thompson back to being consistent because he's had some great moments. And boy, he's had some real head-scratching moments over the last few games. So, look, it's tournament week, as you know. We'll do lots of content this week. I'll try to find someone from Kent State that we can talk to. We'll do some pop-up shows, and there's just, this is the most fun time of year.
Rob Senderhoff might call in. He loves phone calls.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's a very good point. And maybe we can get Kelvin in on a 3-way and just talk with everybody in the bracket.
I got to
Fran on too. Why not?
When they won last night, I jumped back onto Google and found an Eamon Brennan blog post from Inside the Hall from late 2007 about Rob Senderoff. I was like, wow, a lot's happened since then.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh. All right, so let me get you guys out of here on this, and let's go on and watch the women's show. Coach Tonsoni, I'll start with you. How much does Indiana need to do now in the NCAA tournament for this season to be a success? The Hoosiers, get the 3 seed in the Big Ten tournament, make it to a Big Ten tournament semifinal. They get a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. Is this season already a success for you, independent of what happens moving forward, or how much do you think needs to happen from this point on?
I think it's multi-tiered. I said this before, given the injuries, to get a 4 seed and finish 3rd in the Big Ten, I think you have to say is some level of success. The roster hasn't been complete. I do think a win in the first round and getting to the second round is the minimal of what you want. I think if they get to the Sweet 16, that is obviously a successful season given the circumstances of where this team was at the beginning of the season, and then without X and a variety of things that we've talked about incessantly. So yes, I think getting to this point and earning a 15th spot in the NCAA tournament on the overall seed line, that's quite an accomplishment. Regardless of how they did it or how we prefer they do it, I think that is a success at this point. I think you don't just want to have a cake without icing, no. You need to have a little icing, and the icing is a Sweet 16. Take it from a fat guy, I know about icing. It's good. It's good.
Icing is good. We love icing.
we need the icing.
We're gonna need a new Bob Thompson song called "Icing Is Good." It just needs to remix.
You ice the ball screen, you ice the cake. It goes together.
We got the lyrics already. Here we go. All right, Bob, you're on, man. Galen, over to you.
Look, I talked about this on Crimson Cast earlier. I think this season is a success from the standpoint that you break a multi-year streak of not winning double-digit games in the conference. You're a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament. It's your highest seed since 2013. You beat Purdue twice. for the first time since 2013. A lot of real positives. Your schedule strength gets better overall. I think long term, we will certainly what happens in the tournament is going to be inextricably linked to what the season's success or failure was in the eyes of most fans. To me, I think getting to the second weekend would make the season an unqualified success. I think if they lose, on Sunday, well, that's not ideal, but it's further than they went the year before. If they lose the first game, it kind of makes you question what you saw for most of the season. And that's where I don't know that we will say for sure whether this was a successful season until down the line. Because I think ultimately where this season will be judged as a success or failure is, did it help to change the culture of Indiana basketball closer to what people expect it to be and want it to be? And I think it did. It looks like it did, but that's not a question that we can adequately answer for a few years.
All right. Well, Coach, Galen, thank you guys so much for being here. I know it was a busy week for you with all the bracketology stuff, and you're probably ready to go kick back with a beer or an iced donut.
I got to do some Crimson Cast next. So, yeah.
Oh, that's right. Crimson Cast. Very nice. Well, thanks to Rick Bozich for joining us, Coach Marlowe, Ryan, everybody who was here. Thank you to everybody who was here live. But it is time now to go watch the women's selection show, watch the women, have their number one seed announced. If you're in the private community, Jeff and Kathy have a Zoom happy hour going over there, so go check that out. And check Crimson Cast, check the Assembly Call feed. We will probably have tons of content coming for you this week as we have a nice long wait until Friday night for Indiana's NCAA tournament game. But it should be worth the wait. It should be a heck of a game, and hopefully our guys are ready to keep marching on. And let's go have a fun few weeks here in the tournament. All right, everybody. We will talk to you soon. As always, keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.